Then later I'll take one of you and Greg sit just in your clothes. To have one before Greg goes.
You don't expect to
Without
have a picture of
clothes.
them without clothes?
Yes, we want to have our clothes on.
I think Greg and I should go into his room and we'll jump under the covers and we'll put our hands on top and you can take a picture. We'll be the two of us in the bed.
You love that one, don't you?
We'll put the blanket over around up to our waist, put our hands on top, and then that'll be the...
Not easy to sit. You know, I think if we had there was those pillows in the back, we'd be then
So
straight.
it's good. It's also good for your spine to learn yourself to sit up straight.
You can't talk like that. You can't all the time. You won't be able to talk.
Sure, you can.
No
To
way.
a certain extent.
Well, you two, it's Sunday, the day after yesterday, Saturday,
Right.
and here we are in beautiful deserts, Palm Desert. I don't know why I keep on getting that. Palm Desert. This is a beautiful part of southwestern United States here in Southern California. And we're interviewing Nona Marie and Marguerite Foisie. And they are here telling us a little bit about their experiences in life. In particular, their time growing up. And both of them were not born in the United States. Both of them ended up coming to Canada and the United States from China. So we're kind of going over their history and anything they'd like to share with us about their lives. And we hope to pass copies of these videos along to all interested parties, particularly family members, people that want to get an insight into this incredible history that we have here. So yesterday we were talking a little bit about the arrival of families to Canada and the United States. And maybe you'd like to continue, Aunt Nona, with how you came to Manitoba, I guess, or Saskatchewan?
Yes, we landed up in Manitoba,
Uh-huh.
Winnipeg,
Yes.
Manitoba, the northern part of the city.
Uh-huh.
And my husband had to be interned in the hospital every day during that time. And at that time I was expecting my first son, and within that time, I would say the second month of the arriving, I gave birth to my first son, Paul, young Paul. And before that, in order to even go anywhere, we had to look for a place to live. And at that time, in the north end where I was walking, I met a lady who's had a house there, and she said, "Well, I guess you're pregnant and you are going to have a baby. We don't want children, but that's okay." And this is how it started. And I also brought out, within those half year, we brought 6 months, I should say, we brought out my father and my mother from Shanghai, so that they'd be all together. And this is how it really started. And it was within that year, just at the end of that year, that my father had a heart attack. And I wrote to Rita, my sister. And in the States, when she got my letter, she also helped us out by giving me some money at Eaton's. The store was Eaton's at that time, to get a bed. So we did have a bed to sleep on. And we had a lot of furniture coming in from Shanghai.
You shipped it all the way from China to Canada.
Yes.
Amazing.
We said we figured that we were allowed to, because my husband was working for the United Nations in Shanghai a hospital.
Okay.
With a hospital there. So this is why we were able to come out.
Okay.
And that was a wonderful experience, very scary, with a lot of immigrants coming, and you could not leave Shanghai by boat, so we had to go by train to Tianjin, which is a city, and from there we waited for a boat that full of thousands of people going to Hong Kong. And from Hong Kong, I was pregnant at that time with my first child. The American consulate did not want me to have a plane to go to Winnipeg. We had offers from the church and the hospital for my husband to work there. The father's name was Father Warnke.
Yes.
He was a very, very kind man, very
Yes.
nice man,
Uh-huh.
who helped us a lot in Winnipeg. So this was the beginning of my coming to Canada. And they found out that I had a baby from the hospital, I guess in the hospital, which was Salvation Army Hospital. I got into the newspaper, the front page, with myself and my first child, Paul. And at that time, the sign on the paper said something like, "Mother is born, has given birth to a baby in Canada, a Canadian child born here, and had to leave China, etc." It made a big thing of it. I get a quick letter from my mother in Shanghai saying, "How could you say that? Because we're still in China and
Yes.
we're trying to get to Canada."
Right.
So it was a very scary thing.
Right.
But nevertheless, I guess they never saw the paper, which I have still in my album. And so this is how my parents came. And then, as I say, he passed away, and my sister Rita, you came out for the funeral.
Greg.
You did. With Greg. And you are Greg here.
Yes, I'm the one.
So I still remember Rita coming out to help us out. At that time, the Canadian government in Winnipeg sent us from Winnipeg to Ninette. But there's a time between that my husband had to go all the way up north
Yes.
to study, which was to work. And that was the PA.
Right.
In the PA, PAS, the PA.
All this happened in 1951.
In 51, right. We came in the end of 50. So this was the very, very beginning. And it was a difficult time for a woman to have a child, not knowing what to do, and a husband who's had to be always working either up north or down within a very short time. But we did get to Ninette. And it was a wonderful experience coming to the house that was given to us. My sister was there, and at that time, already I had also sponsored my mother-in-law from South America.
Okay.
The family came from Shanghai to South America,
Yes.
and we were planning to come to Canada.
Right.
So this is how it all happened. So we had my mother-in-law with us, and my mother, and my sister, and you, Greg, was there, and Paul.
I don't recall.
And
but
this is how we started.
Yes.
And it was a lovely experience because the superintendent's wife, Mrs. Payne, came and brought us an apple pie. I still remember, and that was our first experience in Canada that way.
Okay, wonderful. Mom, are you comfortable? Is there too much sun for you, or
Seems a little too much sun. I don't look into the sun. That's
are
all
you?
right.
Shall we move you a little? Both move you over a little bit to the left. Would you like that?
Why not?
Sure.
If you'd like to, we can
Why don't
wait.
you stand up?
Pause button for a minute. and
Sure.
We'll change everything.
Nona suggests that I speak up.
Okay.
I can't be heard.
We just moved a little bit. So, Mom, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience coming from Shanghai to the U.S.? I think you came to California, did you not?
Yes, indirectly,
Yes.
I did come to California, but it took us about 29 days to come from Shanghai. Philip and I, we were in a steamer, I guess a freighter steamer, a Norwegian. I can't remember the name of that freighter. And it took us 29 days from Shanghai to go to Hong Kong, from Hong Kong to Manila, then from Manila back to Hong Kong, and it went on and on until finally we arrived at the west coast of California, and were greeted at Port Angeles. That was it, and we're greeted there, and we're told to produce papers to allow us entry into. So there was a wedding picture to show them, and everything until he says, "Where is your chest X-rays.
Yes.
Well, we didn't have any. We didn't need those. We have a marriage certificate and something else, but we didn't have. He said, "Well, you're not allowed to enter." Said, "You'll just have to stay here overnight, and then we'll have to check you out." So I said, my first, I guess, 24 hours were in a I guess school, in a church, not a church, but I guess it was where ladies of the night who were kept wandering around the street were put in for the night.
So you were in prison with hot prostitutes. Is that what you were saying, Mom?
Well,
That's not a very good welcome to North America.
No,
I might have to apologize on the part of my cultures. We didn't mean, we were a mistake.
Right. So
No offense meant, no offense taken.
they said, to spend the night there, and once my X-rays came through
Uh-huh.
the following morning, and the Dad made the attempt to get hold of Frank Foisie in in California, in
Yes.
Berkeley, to see what can be done to facilitate it.
Frank Foisie was your husband's father.
Right.
Right.
Well, they arranged to have an easy time for the following day to have an X-ray for me, and it was done, and I was allowed to enter.
Okay.
And from there, that's when I met so many of the Foisies in Seattle.
I see.
And from there, we took a train all the way to Berkeley.
Okay.
And that's where I met Phil's family
Okay.
out there. That was my first arrival
Wow.
there.
And initially you settled not in Berkeley, but initially you settled in Santa Rosa. Is that
No,
correct?
first is Sausalito.
First Sausalito.
Frank Foisie felt that living with them in Berkeley,
Uh-huh.
Alvarado Road was the home they were in. There was Frank Foisie, his wife, Winifred Foisie, and his
Brother?
brother-in-law, Unc, called him Unc, and also Mrs. Cryer, who was a housekeeper at the Foisies there. She took care of everything, but she always sat down at the table with us.
Right, and
But
she was my godmother, I believe.
Yes, she was.
That's right.
Right, that's right. So that's how my life there until Dad, he got the job as a runner, I guess, what do they call them at that time, for San Francisco paper.
The Chronicle?
For the Chronicle, as a handing out pencils and things, running.
A copy boy.
Copy boy, right, copy boy.
Right.
For the San Francisco Chronicle. And then Jack, who was working at that time for the Los Angeles Times, also pulled strings and got your father an appointment with a Santa Rosa Press Democrat, the other newspaper in Santa Rosa.
Okay.
And that's where we moved to Santa Rosa.
All right.
From there, after a few years there, your father was very frustrated because there was no foreign news to be printed, really, that
Right.
came through. He started looking for other jobs, and so he took a tour. For one thing, we went to Winnipeg, not Winnipeg, but Nanette.
Nanette, Manitoba.
Arriving with you at that time, traveling from Santa Rosa all the way to Nanette. At that time, no disposable diapers, nothing like that.
Oh, sorry, Mom. Sorry for the inconvenience, but I appreciated the vacation. Do you remember that visit, Aunt Nona?
Yes, I absolutely remember that.
Was I as much of a
More than
rascal
once,
then as in
actually.
later on in my youth? Was
Yes,
I
many
getting into
times
trouble?
though she came out because my mother was there, and
Right.
that's what she came for. And one time you came out when Aunt Anna was there.
Right.
I remember
She
that.
came from Los Angeles to join
Yes.
us, and from there we traveled
Exactly.
all the way across in that old car, and always had to have a bag of water on top of the trunk or something. You'd have to stop and fill in water into the car. I'd forgotten what kind of car it was, but it was something that Frank Foisie gave us. to
I
make
will.
use of.
I will stop your story, which is so interesting of how you came to the States, because I have a little bit to say that I forgot that I wanted to say.
Yes.
When you mentioned the ladies of the night, we used to have quite a few of them always walking around in Shanghai. And we were young and we knew about that. And of course we would have we would what we call put our noses up to it whenever we saw these young women
Yes.
or women.
Uh-huh.
Since then, of course, things have changed. But at that time, this is how we always looked at it, negatively.
Right.
And on my train, on the boat that I had to go from Tianjin to Hong Kong before going to Canada, I was very sick. As I said to you, I had the first baby and I was pregnant. I was so ill that I couldn't stand it. I was almost dying there on the on the boat.
Right.
And a lady of the night, she had red hair, and I knew her, a beautiful woman, middle-aged woman, but very beautiful. This is I knew the story later.
Uh-huh.
She went to the captain,
Yes.
the Norwegian captain, and
Uh-huh.
I don't know his name,
Uh-huh.
and told him that there's a woman who is very sick and pregnant.
Uh-huh.
And what he did was he took me in with my husband
Uh-huh.
to stay until we got to Hong Kong, and we were right on the top with the captain, whereas all the hundreds of people were down in the boat, down
Right.
below, with
And the
all
whole-
the immigrants and children and everything else. So the whole story was it was a really sad but happy, exciting for me. But at the same time, I'll never forget that woman who helped me.
Great story. Wonderful story.
I can tell one other thing. In our
Yes.
crossing
Uh-huh.
from San Francisco
Yes.
via Manila, via Hong Kong, and so on, and I became very, very sick. It was one of those transport that kept wobbling, I guess. It didn't have the full load of things that it needed to carry from one part of the curl to the other. Your father would come up to me and say, "Rita, can't you come on in?" He said, "We're sitting here, we're playing cards." He said,
Right.
"Come and sit." And I'd say, "No, I'm going to sit outside on the board." I couldn't stand. I'd get so sick out there. He says, "And I want my mother." And that's what he remembered me saying. I want my mother. But that's how exciting.
Well,
it
Dad was always a big card player. He loved cribbage and all kinds of card
Right.
games. And
Right.
so, where should we go from here? Shall we talk a little bit more about your settling into Canada and the United States? And right now, I think we have you, Nona, in Ninette,
Yes.
right? And what about your move to Winnipeg and St. James? And
Well, yes, we moved. The government again moved my husband from Ninette, which was a beautiful town, I guess, with 150,000 cats in there, and one gas station, and there was no post office, but there was a sort of a hardware store there, and a meat market, and that's all that was on that. And I learned how to drive a car. My mother said, you should learn how to drive a car.
Right.
So this is where the interns of the hospital would often come out to help me out. And then we had people coming from different parts of the world, and some of them were from China, some young men who were doctors, young doctors coming in for experience in that sanatorium, because Ninette was a sanatorium for tuberculosis. And so we would often have them over for parties, just to enjoy life, the new life that we had.
And to enjoy the famous Russian hospitality, no doubt.
Exactly. Of how my mother, of course, would be cooking there.
Yes.
And perhaps this is the time to say a little bit in Russian.
Yes.
So я буду сейчас говорить по-русски с тобой, чтобы что-нибудь рассказать, как мама готовила, скажем. И я тогда скажу по-английски это. I thought I would tell you that I'll talk in Russian now, and then I'll have I told Rita, why don't you talk about our mother when she cooked for us, or something like that, because you might be interested.
Yes.
Although, we just ate food, but we didn't eat Chinese food, but whatever. So, Rita, что-нибудь расскажи. Пельмени.
Что тебе сказать?
Ты расскажи про пельмени. Tell us about that Russian food.
Пирожки.
Пирожки тоже.
Пирожки и пельмени. Two different things.
Я как помню очень редко, что она хорошо готовила.
Очень хорошо.
Очень хорошо готовила. И, конечно, все американцы и канадцы и американцы любили все, как я не помню, как мы говорили, пельмени. Пельмени are the small little bits of meat rolled up in dough. It's something like Italian little thing. I've forgotten what
It's like a
Italian
tortellini.
Tortellini, like a tortellini. Tortellini, это пирожки, пельмени in Russian, and it's usually boiled in water, and then you pour a bowl of it, and it's for about 10 or 12 of these little pельмeni in a bowl. And
Chicken soup.
It's chicken stock, yes.
Chicken stock, and that was a part of the meal, usually very meal, and that was a rather, I guess, important dish for Russians. Besides
Piroshki.
pirashki, and that's a cooked meat in a dough-like, and it was baked usually. Sometimes they're boiled, but most of it was baked. And that's about it, I think.
And you mentioned something about having people over, like we had people over from the States that came out as a visit, soldiers, some soldiers at that time that you knew, that Philip knew.
And they
came to our place to eat. Do you remember that?
at home back in Shanghai.
Yes, that's right.
They did enjoy to come and visit
eat our
us
food.
in Shanghai.
The vodka was very important for them. And my father used to make the vodka with different kinds of flavors of pepper and hot this and cold this and lemons and lemon rind.
Yes.
And so we had different kinds of
Vodkas
to enjoy for the men.
For the men.
Women were just...
The women didn't drink vodka?
Well, we served it, but not we did not.
Right. You didn't join in all the festivities.
That's right.
But one thing I do remember the Russians enjoyed is a feast during Easter.
Yes.
When they would have baked bread called kulichi.
Kulichi.
And you have to bake these, perhaps a week or two before Easter came along, and baking it. And then there's always a big spread of Russian foods on the table. And at this point, at Christmas time, Easter time,
yes.
the men usually go visiting from one household to the other. And our father did that too. But he also invited all the other people, men he knew at the BAT, British American Tobacco Company, with whom he worked. He would invite them to come to our house during Easter for that, I guess, feast. And of course, he, in the meantime, when visiting from one house to another, imbibing, getting a touch of vodka and eating the food and moving along until towards the end of that Easter holiday evening, he'd come in sort of roaring drunk, with
quite happy,
very happy for.
Yes.
And in the meantime, all the Americans would have come to our house, drinking that and participating in this holiday.
Who do you think drinks harder, the Irish or the Russians?
I think the Russians, perhaps.
I would say the Russians, because every time the way we had served it was always in very fine little glasses, very tiny, like almost like 2 teaspoonfuls is all that was on it. But the Russians that I know that I've met came since then, even now, from Russia, right till 2012 now, they drink it in half glasses, just literally like a water.
Right.
And I can't imagine that, but that's what. So I would say the Russians are pretty hard.
Pretty
I don't
hard
know
bunch.
about the Irish. It was so, wasn't it?
Any other foods you want to share that you ate during your childhood, other than pilmeni, piroshki, and kulich?
Well, I've tried to bake kulich, the Easter bread. And up until last year, I'd have bake a kulich once a year. I'd have the same recipes that handed down to me from my mother.
And it's very interesting, Mom, the way you bake it, because you usually tend to bake it in round tins, right? And like apple juice
Right.
containers that you cut the top off, drink the apple juice. What you
Yes.
have left, you use that as the form for the bread.
Right, and I've done it for years, up until this past year.
Is that form traditional to have it that
Yes.
shape?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, it's not only that, but on top of the form, you make an icing.
Yes.
You cover the top of that bread
Uh-huh.
with icing, and
Called
then on
kulich.
it you write XB, which is Christ has risen
Okay.
in Russian. It's
All right.
XB in
Uh-huh.
Russian, and that is always on top of the cake.
But I know that icing can be quite special because it's not icing always like we apply to a cake. Mother, very often you would have a piece of cloth,
Right,
and you would
to
soak
give
the
it shape.
cloth in the icing, and then when you place the cloth
You remember
over
that,
the
yes.
kulich, of course, it would harden, and it would be like a shell that you could lift off, cut the bread, and then
Yes.
put it back on.
Right,
Yes,
you do remember
exactly.
Of
that.
course.
Right.
These are my favorite foods.
I
And
still
it
have
was
that
what
taste.
what is now I eat, but I don't eat is but the panettone,
Uh-huh.
which is the Italian one.
Okay.
I don't bake anymore.
Right.
So I will eat panettone, which is so
Okay.
similar
Yes.
to the Russian kulich.
Uh-huh.
It's interesting how different
Cultures,
countries
yeah,
blend
similar.
together.
Yes.
It's interesting.
I think this is the first year in years that I did not bake the
Mm-hmm.
kulich this year.
Well, I know that you have these recipes written down,
Yeah.
and I look forward to making those available to any family members that would like them. If you can't reach one of these two lovely young women here, contact Greg Foisie. I'd be happy to make that available to you.
Anytime.
Is there anything else you'd like to share about the way that you eventually came to British Columbia, or the way you eventually came to Virginia, Mom? Any stories in there that you think you can tell them about the time that I got lost and where I was, and all the police looking for me as a child?
Well, it was in Louisville, Kentucky, because from Santa Rosa Press Democrat,
Uh-huh.
we moved on to Louisville, Kentucky,
Okay, why did you move there?
because of the job your father was able
Uh-huh.
to acquire
Yes.
as a foreign editor. Oh, I don't know if he was a foreign editor, but he was forgotten what his position was when we moved to Louisville.
Uh-huh.
And we limited in funds, and also we never imported or didn't buy a new television set. So that one day we were looking for Tim.
Not Tim, for Greg.
Greg, couldn't find Greg anywhere, but then and Tim with 2
Not
years
Tim, it would be
difference.
Jeff.
Yes, Jeffrey, 2 years younger than Gregory, and we couldn't find Gregory. We looked all over. We called the police. They came, and we were living at that time in Louisville near a golf course, and so we thought he could have been running all over the place looking, and police came out. We couldn't. Finally started working at Neighbors and found him next door in the home of a neighbor watching television in the basement. And so he had been there all this time. So I think that was the time we bought themselves a television screen.
So there you go, kids. There's a story about if you need a big screen TV, you know what to do. Just vacate the house and stay hidden in someone's basement for half a day. Force your parents to buy that big screen TV. Only kidding. Do you have any stories like that to share about the young Paul, the young Rick and Rob growing up? And did they get in any problem? I mean, Rick's not here right now,
Yes.
so I feel free to ask you to divulge
Yes.
all of his secrets. Whoops, here he comes.
Well, that doesn't matter. I just talked about the young, my first child
Yes.
being Paul, and bringing up in Ninette
Uh-huh.
in the sanatorium, where because I was partly a singer by then,
Yes.
not professional at that time. I was asked to often entertain and help out and sing to the patients and make parties, and then young Paul would be around there. Not necessarily performing there, but he was there. And at that same time, I was expecting my second child, and whose name is Richard.
Yes.
And of course, we had no car in Ninette. We moved in, and I was pregnant and expecting any minute. And at that moment, I was expecting, and so my husband ran from the hospital. Oh, he was in the
Sanatorium.
Yes, actually, right in the hospital, they were performing an operation, and they phoned up and said, "Your wife is expecting any minute. You better come." So we had to find a way of going from Ninette to the hospital, which was exactly 50 miles away in Brandon, Manitoba, is where we went to from Ninette. So we had to drive, and I was expecting, and so we borrowed a car. And I remember my husband saying, take a big pillow, put it on the pillow, and then sit on the car, please, when we're driving, because this is not our car. So he drove his 50 miles, and within, I had the labor, and the child was born that same night.
In the
and
hospital?
His name was Rick.
His name was Rick?
Richard.
No, really, it was Rick? Hard to believe. Hard to believe. It's
baby.
true, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Hands above.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yes, and as some children have what he had was this yellow tint on his skin. Whatever is good, that some children get, jaundice, like a jaundice, and they would say, somebody said, oh, your son, one of my family would say, oh, this is a bit of jaundice, and I would look and I would never see that. In the mother's eyes, to me it was a perfectly beautiful white baby instead of slightly jaundiced for about 2 weeks. That he gave us problems.
Well, he's well made up for that now. So.
Yes, but then I was very lucky because it was my mother and my mother-in-law, two of them, in this house watching the second baby.
Rick and
then
Paul.
Young Paul sort of was left alone, and there was Richard at that time. And then, after 3 or 4 years, 4 years later, we were moved back to Winnipeg, and that is when we bought a home in St. James.
But before you start talking about St. James, I want to mention at that time period when both Rick and Jeffrey were of the age where at least I felt they had to be baptized. And so in California, I had this baptismal dress of my mother-in-law's, Rita Foisie, to do it for Jeffrey, having a...
Gregory or Jeffrey?
Jeffrey,
for
baptism.
I
you were 2 years difference to you. So we got Jeffrey baptized in Santa Rosa, California, carried his dress all the way up to Ninette because Richard was going to be baptized. And then they were looking for somebody to stand in for, I guess, with the child behind. And Phil wasn't there. Phil was traveling, so he couldn't be there with Richard. So they decided they had a friend who was, I've forgotten his name, he's a Polish background. And so they came at the Catholic Church.
He's a worker there.
Yes.
The Rothoffs, maybe.
No, Rothoff was not there. That was Winnipeg.
And we had to announce, give the service in Latin. And the only one who could give it was this stand-in, who was a Polish Canadian, and because Phil wasn't there, and there was Richard in that dress being baptized. And your father was there, of course, and when time to thank the priest and all, I can't remember exactly what your father had said, that he would not give any money to the Catholics, because I think, what did he say about he was horrified?
Well, it was the priest was being a nice, fat, jovial priest, who was quite happy and pleased that we had brought a baby here to be baptized, I guess. And he turned around to my husband, who was Dr. Marie, and he said something like, "Oh, Dr. Marie, this is wonderful. Congratulations to have this child. When he's now baptizing, he's a real little angel, but he was a real devil." It was a devil, he said, and my husband turned.
That would be you.
I was a devil?
That's what the priest
He would
said.
say something like a devil because you were an angel because you were baptized, and my husband turned around and said, "You are a fool. From now on, I will never go back to church, to the Catholic Church," is what he said, and that was the story.
Go figure.
That was the story. He was just saying something. He didn't say devil, but he said something, the angel and not an angel. And my husband just couldn't believe it, that a man would say that. It was quite
So
What's
I started off with a bent halo right from the beginning of the
And what's your situation like today? Which side of the divide do you feel you're on? The toss-up?
I don't think that halo's ever going to be straight.
Well, then later on, of course, I got to Winnipeg when we were in Winnipeg. After that, we went to Winnipeg, and I looked around, and I see that in this, all my neighbors are going to children are going either Sundays to church or doing something. So I joined the Unitarian church, and at that time I was singing there. Weekly, and then I brought my two sons, Richard and
Paul?
the older one, and the younger one was coming. Paul was
Robbie
younger.
was coming.
Yeah, Robbie, the youngest one.
Right.
And there was something about that I was going to say, but it'll come back to me. About
Was it about singing in the church or about having the boys go to church?
I was singing there, but that was not.
How did you begin singing in the opera?
I think it was this, because you see, my upbringing, although I had no religion at the beginning, I still thought that children should be baptized or something. And I told my husband they should be baptized, and he said it doesn't matter, and I said no. So that's why in the Unitarian church, when I got in, I just said, and Rick was there, and I said, my child Rick, because Robbie wasn't born then, that I want him to be baptized. And I remember the priest, the Unitarian minister saying, this is not necessary, but we can do something for you.
Yes.
And so they did a beautiful water type of urn thing and a rose, and that was the whole thing. It was just so very simple.
They take off the stickers off a rose and they hand it to the child so that his life will be free of stickers that you get a rose.
That's your life.
Stickers?
I didn't know what
all the thorns.
Thorns.
Right.
Oh.
So when you were supposedly baptized in the Unitarian church, and this is a great Unitarian joke, they took all the thorns off the rose before they gave it to your mother and you as a symbol of them removing obstacles and difficulties in your life. Now, has that proven to be true?
I would say so.
There you go.
So you had that as well as the Catholic one with that priest at that time.
I guess so. It's turned out. I feel I'm probably one of the luckiest guys on the planet.
All right.
But I didn't know about
Let's hear for the you-yous.
I guess I gave. The rose was given to him, and I never saw them taking the prickles.
Well, they always say that before they hand it to the child.
I didn't know that.
That's a nice ceremony.
That's a nice little thing. It's a nice. This is what Winnipeg reminded me of.
So I do have a question for you, Aunt Nona. I wanted to have you tell us a little bit about how you entered the world of opera and became an opera star.
Well, I was lucky. In many ways, I'll say very little.
Yes.
Starting right from the beginning, that in school I just enjoyed singing loudly. And the nun, Mother Atkinson, whom I loved for 12 years in my school,
Yes.
was appreciative of that. And so we did a lot of singing at the church. And I did enjoy it. I wanted to go to the States. My mother didn't want me to go to become a singing career, but she would rather that I would be a stenographer, of all things. So I took up typing, etc., and all. It just started slowly with people just wanting to hear me. But I really started in Winnipeg because I started to take voice lessons, driving from Ninette, when we lived in Ninette, to Winnipeg, which is quite a while, about over 120 miles anyway, in the snow drifts and all, for lessons. And because of that, there were things like festivals, and I won festivals, etc. And one day I decided, I saw in the paper that I could try for the Metropolitan Opera. I was just turning 29, and apparently till 30 you could be trying out for these things. So I thought I would have wrote to my sister, and Rita helped me by coming. I went to visit them at that time, and I went from Winnipeg. I went to Seattle. Is where all the auditions were. And I did win it. And so then I got a small scholarship, and from that I was sent to New York. In New York, of course, I did pretty well, but not didn't win anything. The tenor was a marvelous young man, and he won. But the point was that it was the beginning for me.
Yes.
In Winnipeg, where I began to sing. So eventually, when Winnipeg had the beginning of an opera, I was the very first one to sing a very small opera on television. And this is how mostly I started that. So when this was Winnipeg was over, and we we were still in Winnipeg, I should say. And I can't even think what it was. Because we were going to Canada.
Yes.
To Vancouver. I came to Vancouver, bought a house.
What year was that about?
It was exactly 67.
67.
1967. And in 67, my husband was a wonderful thing at the General Hospital, and he was there, working there, and I began to sing quite a bit, and I decided to join the Winnipeg, the Vancouver Opera. So we had, just before I wanted to, this was Vancouver, we had a house fire. We had a fire, so this is the month that we bought that house in Vancouver. And they phoned me, they said you can go and audition. I went to audition for the Vancouver Opera. I had no music because all my music burned. All my music burned. I had also done quite a bit of singing with the CBC, Canada, on radio and with orchestra. So all my music was burned in our house fire. It was pretty bad, and I was quite depressed. So I know all about being depressed for people who feel the same way for a while. And we were discussing that before that. But this all got over, and I was in the chorus, just starting, when they phoned me to say, "Can you help out with Placido Domingo, because the singer is not here. She's got ill, and we have to send another singer over. Can you do it?" And I said, "I can try." So I was there helping out Placido Domingo for 2 solid weeks. We were singing with orchestra, etc. But at that time, I had never had experience of stage work.
Right.
So this is from where I thought I should start doing stage work. So I did some stage work with the opera for quite a few years that I was there.
And
I enjoyed it. So that was my real career, and of course that's taught as well.
Right, so your career from the beginning of singing in Winnipeg after the audition in Seattle through to your teaching.
Yes.
How many decades did that span?
It spanned everything till about 2-3 years ago, where I literally retired.
Just over a half a century.
Yes, it was. Yes.
Yeah.
Lots of studying to do, and exams, and holding exams, and always considering having the degrees. For me, they were important, which I did through the Toronto Conservatory. So all this was normal for me at that time, bringing up the children at the same time with my mother's help. She was always there.
And you always had encouragement from our mother to continue.
Always. And I had the same encouragement from my husband, always.
And Paul also developed a career as an
artist.
Artist.
Can you both tell us a little bit about Uncle Paul and his role in that regard? His recognition for his work and so on?
Yes. Well, Paul, when I met my husband, he was doing some marvelous paintings, and I have had them, and I would ask him about them. And he told me that when he was studying medicine in Shanghai, and then he was studying medicine, or was going to Hong Kong as well to study. Then the war came out, and his father definitely sent him back to Shanghai. But during that time, he was painting in Hong Kong, a lot of clients in a bar, etc. Beautiful faces of Chinese people of different times of their lives. And so I have quite a few of these kind of wonderful things left for me in the home. And this is how he really started. But then when we got to Canada, he of course went at that time to the PA for the North, as well as working in Winnipeg, both at the same time. So in the PA, he met a doctor, a very nice doctor. I forgot his name right off this minute. He was the main doctor. He had children. And my husband took some of the paintings, the colors of the child, and took them and started to paint something that he saw up north, which were the Eskimos. And my husband fell in love with the idea of the Eskimo carvings. The carvings have this smoothness about them that there's nothing like it that we have seen. And he was interested in that. And so we have quite a few wonderful paintings of that. And later on in time, the hospital has asked my husband to have these paintings reproduced into stamps for
Easter seals.
Easter seals.
Right.
Easter seals, which were done. So we have these wonderful paintings of his. This was his career.
Okay. So Rick is going to take off for a little bit. He's going to look for John, make sure John's fine, because he's been gone quite a while. Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much. So, shall we take a break now, or would you like to continue?
I think break is good.
Yes.
Let's have a break, and then when we come back, hopefully John can join us, and we can continue. And I want to thank you both very much for taking so much time out of your vacation to share all of this with your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren.
Right, yes.
Thank you.
There should be more, but that's all I can think of now, right?
All right, we're getting set up here for the remainder of our short talk.
Discourse. Where did we stop? What were we talking about?
Well, when we stopped, we were sharing a little bit about settling in Canada and the United States. Right, you talked about the various foods that you had eaten, the Russian foods growing up, and then you were talking a little bit more about settling in Canada. Nona, you were talking about your career singing and how that transpired from, I guess, the mid-'60s until just recently, 2011 or so. And I was asking you to share anything else that you'd like about your lives during that time. If you wanted to talk about your sons and your daughter, you could do that, or you could just concentrate more on your various activities in the community, anything else you'd like to share.
Because you wanted Rita to talk about that.
Well, I'd like you both to talk. Anything else you'd like to share?
Rob, remember the birth of Rob?
Yes, we talked about that.
Yes.
You talked about Rob.
Yeah, but did you were going to talk about the travel that you went to in order for Steve? It's up to you what you want to do.
You go ahead and start.
I'm not sure whether we talked about music, at least my what we call career. It was wonderful. I also taught for many years.
Yes.
Voice at my own home, my own studio, and I really enjoyed it. There is between my oldest son and my second son, who was Richard, the one who was baptized in that wonderful
dress,
Foisie dress. That it was a marvelous thing. On top of it all, coincidentally, when I look around here, we are now sitting and talking in his home, a beautiful place, in Palm Springs. I've never been there. It's wonderful. It's about 90 degrees, and I got a lovely gift from my son to come here. with my husband John in order to enjoy this climate. It
Well,
is
to get
wonderful.
together with Rita.
On top of it, pardon, well,
The
and
main thing was-
then
main
the
thing-
main thing that my son Rick wanted was that I will join with my sister
Uh-huh.
in Washington D.C. to come and join here
Yes.
to be together because of my illness. I'm not able to travel as much, so she's come out here to see me. So we're spending our time thinking
Great.
about our kids, our birthing, etc. that happens.
Uh-huh.
And now, one time, I'm looking at them now. One is my Richard. My second one has this lovely home, and he's got business out, and I can't stand all the computers, how they work here. It is amazing to see all this happening, where you can work in one city and be in another, being quite comfortable that all the work is done in another part of your city. I can't understand how that works, but this is what is happening with the younger people.
Yes.
Is this kind of music, and music too. We're
Yes.
listening to music at night,
Uh-huh.
and so all this that is happening electronically is an amazing thing for us. I have a cell phone, and I'm happy to have that.
Right.
But that about all. But I would like to say that it's wonderful being at Rick's place here with his wife Linda, who is out now holidaying. But it is great. Now, on top of it all, I don't forget, but there is my other son who is in music. More
That would be
so-
Rob.
And that is Rob. He has another kind of music. It used to be jazz, etc., or it is still jazz that he likes, but he also has done classical.
Uh-huh.
And now it's an amazing thing that in a small town, it is Shawnigan, which is part of the lake of BC here on the island, Victoria Island.
Vancouver Island,
Vancouver
Shawnigan Lake.
Shawnigan Lake is what it is. He's has an orchestra and sends me music, again electronically, for me to hear about it.
Uh-huh.
So I'm quite proud of him and of my son Richard, with all these electronics going, where he has work in Vancouver as well as he has work right here locally. How about your kids now? Tell me what's happened about Tina. I can't remember now with Tina.
I guess Christina is my third child, but
Yeah.
I had Gregory, my oldest son.
Yes.
The next is Jeffrey. Both of them were born in Santa Rosa, California. And then we moved on through Phil's work. We went on to Louisville, Kentucky. He worked for the Louisville Times. At that, we were there all of 2 years only. That was the
That
year.
was the Louisville Courier Journal,
Yes. What did I say?
the Louisville Times.
The Louisville Courier Journal.
Yes.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And it was during that time when we misplaced Gregory, because we at that time did not own a television set, and we lost him for half a day.
Mom, I want to take credit for that. You didn't really misplace me. I just abandoned you in my youth.
Let's hear that.
It won't be the first time I've done that, and we'll talk about that later, some other time.
We found him out at the neighbor's place, hiding, looking at television, while the police was searching for him all over the place.
Through a golf course.
Yes, and we were there all in all 2 years, and I guess by then Gregory must have been maybe
3 or 4 or something
3 or
like that?
4, and then Jeffrey was 2 years younger than he, and we arrived in Santa Rosa. No, we
No,
arrived
Virginia.
in Virginia, and lived in Park Fairfax, an area that was familiar to Phil, and he worked for the Washington
Post.
for the Washington Post, beginning from those years in the 50s. And his life was really consumed by news, foreign news. And luckily we were at a paper where this was appreciated. And so Gregory and Jeffrey both we lived there And 2 years beyond that, Christina was born. Or 4 years. There's 4 years difference between Jeffrey and Christina. And Christina was the little girl with two big brothers, and her interest would be all about dancing. And I guess she get all kinds of encouragement from her mother, and so she enjoyed it. And at this point, I will stop because she has a career that she can speak about on her own.
Okay. And don't forget your youngest son.
Oh, oh Lord!
Tim would never forgive me if I didn't give him a plug. So.
How many different years now between Tim? Yes, there were almost 10 years difference between Christina and Tim. And he was born also in Alexandria Hospital. Both Christina and Tim are from Virginia. Virginians. They could become presidents of the U.S. giving a few years from now, perhaps.
Who knows?
That's all about. And of course, there's Phil, who is working so hard as a foreign editor of the Washington Post. And we traveled as a result of that. He had lots of work to be done overseas, visiting the various correspondents strewn over in Japan and Europe. But I guess we lived in Paris for about 6 years. And during that period, I sort of developed interest in dance and ended up taking liturgical dance with a church group in Arlington, Virginia. But that was years ago. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And one other thing, I'd like you to comment a little bit on the trip that you took maybe a decade ago back to China, where you were touring with both American and Canadian citizens who had connections to Shanghai and other communities in China. You went back, I was with you, and I want to know if you'd just like to share a little bit about that experience, the changes that you saw between when you were growing up in China and that last visit. Anything you'd like to share?
Well, I know Nona can remember when we lived in King Albert Apartments, because that was, our whole world was the King Albert Apartments. Right. Between that and the Sacred Heart schools in the French concession.
We visited both of those locations.
Yeah. And that area is still, up there, except the school area had been transformed into government buildings.
Okay.
But the King Albert Apartment are established there. Of course, they were all interracial. When we were growing up, they were all people of similar race, usually European race.
They were segregated then.
Yes, right. Yeah. That's it.
Okay, thank you both very much. We
You're
really
welcome,
appreciate this.
Greg.
And look forward to seeing you sometime in Vancouver, where we can grab some of these other people and get more info down on tape.
Greg, thanks so much for coming out.
You're welcome. My pleasure. This is great. And we'll see how this your images are quite dark, and I've got a special focus on that should bring out your features more. So we'll see if that works.
Okay.
If not, it'll be like silhouettes for this last part.
Good.
Thank you.